My name is Delphine Marsh. I was 28 when the fluorescent lights of a hospital corridor became the only steady thing in my world. Marin was 5. She had my mother's stubborn chin and a laugh that used to fill our small apartment like sunlight through a cracked window. That laugh had gone quiet 3 weeks earlier, replaced by monitors and the low hum of machines that measured things a mother should never have to watch. The doctor had said a number. Not a diagnosis first, a number. That was how urgent it had become. I remember standing in the corridor with my phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark, listening to it ring in my parents' kitchen 400 miles away, picturing the marble countertops, the good silverware, the framed photograph of my brother's wedding still fresh on the mantel. "We just don't have it right now," my mother said. Her voice had the practiced calm of someone reciting a line she'd rehearsed before I even called. I didn't argue. I never did. I had spent a lifetime learning that arguing with my mother was like arguing with a closed door. The door didn't care, and you only bruised your knuckles. I hung up and sat down on a plastic chair that had absorbed the fear of 1,000 other parents before me, and I did the thing I always did when the ground disappeared beneath me. I went still. Not calm, still. There's a difference. Calm is peace. Stillness is survival. Somewhere in that stillness, a memory surfaced, uninvited, the way memories do when you're too tired to keep them out. I was remembering a ballroom, white orchids, a string quartet, $250,000 spent in a single evening, 6 months before my daughter got sick, celebrating a wedding my parents called the happiest day of the family's life. I hadn't asked for equal treatment. I had never asked for equal treatment. I had only asked this one time for help, and I had been told no. Some families divide love unevenly and call it fairness. Mine called it investment. Julian was born 18 months after me, and from the moment he could walk, he walked into rooms that opened for him without effort. Piano lessons, private tutors, a car at 17 with a bow on it, photographed for the holiday card. I remember standing just outside those photographs more often than inside them, not excluded exactly, just unnecessary to the composition. My father used to say, "Julian has potential that needs cultivating. You, Delphine, you've always been able to figure things out on your own." He meant it as a compliment. I understood, even as a teenager, that it was actually a quiet form of abandonment dressed in admiration. I got a partial scholarship to study architecture. My parents came to exactly one of my 4 years of graduation ceremonies, the year Julian also happened to be receiving an award at the same university for a business plan he never actually launched. I don't say any of this with bitterness. Bitterness curdles, and I made a decision long ago not to let anything curdle inside me. I say it because it explains the arithmetic. In my family, love was never divided by 2. It was allocated by potential, by spectacle, by how good a story it made at dinner parties. Marin changed the equation, I thought. A grandchild. Surely a grandchild would balance the scales. For a while it seemed to. My mother visited when Marin was born. She held her, cried real tears, said the word family, like she meant something new by it. But the pattern doesn't break, because a new person enters it. The pattern absorbs the new person into itself. By the time Marin turned 3, the visits had thinned to birthday phone calls. By the time she turned 5 and her small body began fighting something with a Latin name I made myself learn to pronounce without flinching, my parents were 3 months into planning Julian's wedding, a wedding that would eventually cost more than most people's homes. I didn't see the collision coming. I should have. The arithmetic had never once, in 28 years, solved in my favor. The wedding was in June. Marin's first hospital admission was in July. I have wondered, more times than I'd like to admit, whether the universe was making some kind of point with the timing, or whether it was simply cruelty without a purpose, which is somehow worse. I attended the wedding. I smiled in photographs I now can't look at. I watched my mother adjust Julian's bride's veil with the tenderness of a woman completing a masterpiece, and I thought about how she had never once adjusted anything of mine. Not a veil, not a curriculum, not a bill. 3 weeks after the ballroom emptied of orchids, I sat in a different room that smelled of antiseptic instead of champagne, and I called to ask for help. I want to be precise about what I asked for because precision matters when a family later tries to rewrite its own history. I did not ask for equal love. I did not ask for an apology. I asked for a portion, not even half, of what had just been spent on centerpieces and a live quartet to help save my daughter's life. My father was the one who eventually spoke, after a long silence where I could hear my mother breathing on the extension. Weddings are investments in the family's future, he said. This is a medical situation. There are hospitals for that. There's insurance for that. There wasn't enough insurance for that. I had explained the gap in coverage twice already. He had simply chosen not to retain it, the way people choose not to retain facts that would require them to feel something inconvenient. We raised you to be resourceful, my mother added, as if resourcefulness were a substitute for $250,000. As if resourcefulness could be transfused into a 5-year-old's veins. I said thank you for your time, which is a strange thing to say to your own mother, and I hung up the phone in a hallway where a woman 2 doors down was singing softly to her own sick child, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that I would never ask my parents for anything again. Grief has a sound, but so does resolve, and for weeks I couldn't tell which one I was making. I sold the engagement ring from a marriage that had already quietly ended 2 years earlier, the one I kept in a drawer for reasons I couldn't fully explain even to myself. I sold my car and leased a smaller one. I took on freelance architectural renderings at night, sketching other people's dream houses by lamplight while my daughter slept fitfully in the next room, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm I counted the way other people count sheep. I didn't tell anyone how close we came to the edge. Pride, I've since realized, isn't always vanity. Sometimes it's the only floorboard left to stand on. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't announce itself with tears. It arrives instead as silence. You stop crying not because you've healed, but because your body has run out of the resource crying requires. I moved through those months like someone underwater, functioning, competent, terrifyingly calm on the surface, while beneath it something in me was rewriting its understanding of family from the ground up. My coworker Priya noticed first. She found me one evening still at my desk at 11 p.m., not working, just sitting, staring at a floor plan I'd drawn without remembering drawing it. "You don't have to carry this like it's a secret," she said gently. "It's not a secret," I told her. "It's just mine." She didn't push. But she left a folded piece of paper on my desk before she left that night, a printout about a local fundraising network for families facing medical costs, the kind of resource I'd been too proud or too tired to look for myself. I didn't use it that week. I wasn't ready to ask the world for what my own parents had refused to give. But I kept the paper. I didn't throw it away. That, I think, was the first small hinge the door turned on. I wrote my mother a letter that autumn. I never sent it, but writing it did something sending it never could have. It let me hear my own voice clearly, maybe for the first time in my adult life. I wrote about the ballroom and the waiting room. I wrote about the veil and the bill I still hadn't fully paid off. I wrote, "You didn't refuse me because you didn't have it. You refused me because helping me has never once occurred to you as something urgent." I wrote about wanting to scream at her, and then I crossed that part out because it wasn't true. I didn't want to scream. Screaming would have given her something to defend against, a tantrum she could dismiss, a daughter she could call emotional at the next family gathering, the way she always had. What I actually wanted was stranger and quieter. I wanted her to simply see it, the asymmetry, the cost of being the daughter who is always fine, always resourceful, always somehow surviving without help, versus the son who never had to prove he could survive anything at all. I sat with the unsent letter for 3 days. On the 4th, I folded it into an envelope and put it in the drawer where the engagement ring used to live, and I made a decision that felt less like revenge and more like architecture. I was going to build something they hadn't given me the materials for. Not to punish them. To prove, mostly to myself, that I could. That night, I opened the folded paper Priya had left on my desk, and for the first time, I let myself ask. I didn't confront my parents with anger. I confronted them with an invoice. It took 4 months. I applied for the community medical fund Priya had shown me. I set up a modest page explaining Marin's situation. Not dramatized, just true, and shared it only with people who actually knew us, not strangers, not spectacle. I picked up every rendering contract I could find. I sold the apartment's second-bedroom furniture and turned that space into a home office so I could take on more work without paying for a studio. Slowly, in the unglamorous arithmetic of small deposits and long nights, the number that had once seemed as distant as the moon became reachable. I didn't tell my parents any of this was happening. I didn't need their audience for it anymore. That, more than anything, was the quiet awakening. Realizing I had spent my whole life performing my resilience for them, hoping resilience would finally be the thing that earned their attention, when the truth was that my resilience had simply let them off the hook. So this time, I built it without narrating it to them. No updates. No cries for help sent in their direction. Just work and a fund slowly filling, and a daughter who, against every fear I carried, began to stabilize. The procedure happened on a gray Tuesday in November. I paid for it myself, through the fund, through my savings, through 11 months of nights that blurred into each other. My parents didn't know it was happening until it was already done. That was the thing I did. Not a scheme, not a confrontation staged for effect. I simply stopped waiting for people who had already answered the question of who they were. They found out at Christmas. My mother asked, with the casual cruelty of someone who doesn't realize she's holding a knife, how Marin's little health scare had resolved. I told her, plainly, that Marin had undergone surgery in November, that it had gone well, and that I had paid for it myself. The table went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when a family's private mythology is contradicted by a fact. You should have told us, my father said, which was, I noticed, not the same as I'm sorry we didn't help. I did tell you, I said. My voice didn't rise. I had promised myself, months earlier, writing that unsent letter, that if this moment ever came, I would not give them a version of me they could dismiss as hysterical. I told you in July in a hospital corridor, and you told me there were hospitals for that. Julian shifted in his seat. His new wife looked at her plate. My mother's mouth opened and closed once, searching for an argument that didn't exist anymore, because I hadn't come to argue. I had come to simply state what had happened, the way you'd read aloud from a document that couldn't be edited after the fact. We would have found a way, my mother finally said quietly, if we'd understood how serious it was. You understood, I said. You just didn't think it was your emergency to solve. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I felt, oddly, a kind of tenderness toward the version of myself who had once believed a phone call to that house could ever have gone differently. Marin is 7 now. She still has my mother's stubborn chin, but the laugh is fully hers again. Loud, unguarded, entirely her own. I don't call my parents' house often anymore. Not out of anger, though for a long time I thought that's what it would take. It's something plainer than anger. It's the recognition that some doors, once you've knocked on them enough times without answer, simply stop being doors you need. Julian and I talk sometimes carefully, like two people rebuilding a bridge that was never structurally sound to begin with. He apologized once, in his own imperfect way, for never asking how Marin was doing during those months. I told him I appreciated it. I meant it. Not every relationship in a family has to end in the same place. I kept the unsent letter. It's still in that drawer, folded the same way I left it. I don't know if I'll ever send it. Some truths don't need an audience to be true. What I know now, that I didn't know in that hospital corridor 2 years ago, is this. I didn't need my parents to fund my daughter's survival. I needed, once, to stop asking people who had already shown me who they were to become someone else. The $250,000 was never really the wound. The wound was smaller and older than that. It was a lifetime of learning that my needs were negotiable in a way my brothers never were. I closed that negotiation myself, in the end, quietly, without ceremony. The way you close a door that no longer needs to be argued with, you simply stop standing in front of it, and you walk at last into a room of your own making. Marin is asleep down the hall as I write this. The light under her door is the same warm gold it's always been. Some things, it turns out, you don't have to be given. You can build them yourself, one quiet night at a time. Every family draws its own invisible ledger. Who gets remembered, who gets celebrated, who gets left standing in the hallway while the ballroom fills with orchids. Delphine's story isn't really about $250,000 or a wedding or even a hospital bill. It's about the moment a person stops waiting to be chosen and starts choosing herself. That's not bitterness. That's growth. And growth, quiet as it is its own kind of victory, one that doesn't need anyone else's permission to count. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever felt like the resourceful one in your own family, the one who was expected to manage without help while someone else got the orchids and the string quartet, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to build your own version of justice, quietly, without anyone's help? If Delphine's journey resonated with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story like this one. New cinematic family stories drop every week. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their strength was never owed to anyone, share this video with them. Thank you for watching until the end. Sometimes the loudest kind of justice is the quietest one.